Thank you. And now I call on Representative Crenshaw for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to recognize right off the bat, y'all have an impossible job. Maybe it'd be helpful for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who keep vilifying the last administration to recognize that this is an impossible job. So I'm going to remain intellectually consistent, unlike my colleagues, and recognize that this is an impossible job. What makes it a lot more impossible is when there's a lot more unaccompanied minors coming over the border. If we're looking at fiscal years 2020 versus 2021, there was an 8-fold increase in unaccompanied minors coming across the border. It went from 15,000 to 122,000. And that wasn't some random occurrence because of COVID. That number has remained, actually increased in FY22 to 128,000, and in FY23, it is on track to again be at another 120,000. Wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't we rather live in a world where ORR is not required? It's basically this giant orphanage for people coming across, for children coming across our border. It would be better if it didn't have to exist. Of course, it does have to exist, but it would be better if it didn't, right?
Congressman, we face the prospect of having to provide the care, and we're going to do what we can.
Of course, but wouldn't you rather live in a world where you didn't even have to do that? Is it better for children or worse for children to go across an international border unaccompanied?
Of course it's worse.
Of course it's worse. Of course it's worse. So when we have an 8-fold increase, it not only makes your job ever more impossible than it already was, it's a humanitarian crisis. I can't imagine what changed between the years 2020 and 2021. Does anybody have any, there was an election, right, and a lot of policy changes that created a magnet for unaccompanied minors to come across. And then all of these problems we're talking about with sponsorship and intake and trying to vet sponsors and child labor and sex trafficking, they become exponentially worse because there's an 8-fold increase in the number of kids actually coming across. So how about that? You guys are just trying to deal with it. I get that. I'm not going to vilify you the way my Democrat colleagues vilified your predecessors in the last administration, but I do have some specific questions just to help the kids through this about your policies. I was looking for some policy guidance on what to do when they go missing. It was actually much easier to find your LGBT guidance. This concerned me a little bit, maybe a lot of bit. The guidance says this: when making housing assignments for transgender or intersex youth, the care provider must consider the youth's gender self-identification. Care providers must not base housing assignment decisions of transgender or intersex youth solely on the identity documents or physical anatomy of the youth. So I want to just provide the following scenario. There's a 17-year-old boy, and I know you guys separate them by gender normally, right? I hope so. There's a 17-year-old boy. He tells you all that he's a girl. Does he automatically just get placed into the women's facilities? Is that how that process works?
Congressman, thanks for the question. At HHS, we have a legal obligation, a moral obligation as well, to safely and humanely care for all the...
Is that how the process works? Come on, I'm being really good faith. I'm acting in good faith with you. I hope that's not how the process works, right? Because 72% of the people that come across UACs are actually 15 and older. I mean, you can barely describe them as children.
And so we make sure that we provide all the children in our care with the human rights protections and freedom from discrimination and abuse that they're entitled to.
So it is how that works. It shouldn't work that way, all right? That's at least one member of Congress telling you it should not work that way. It puts girls in danger, and I bet a lot of the girls are younger in age. All right, I want to move on to a couple other things. There was something you said in your testimony that the sponsors are not required to answer your calls when you do that follow-up. Whose rule is that? Is that HHS's rule? Is that a statute? Why can't we make them answer the phone? And if they don't, why can't you send Child Protective Services after them?
Congressman, thank you for that question. We do not have the authority to require them to respond to us.
That doesn't, why not? Okay, so that needs to be a statute change.
That's a question you have to ask yourself.
Okay, that's a statute change that needs to happen? Okay, that's helpful. Gang affiliate, I'm out of time. Well, actually, could you respond to my colleague's previous question about how do these kind of cases happen? They were talking about in Austin where one sponsor could request and like 20 different kids time and time again. This one had 44 children. Please explain how that happens, and I yield back.
I'm not familiar with that circumstance, but every sponsor has to go through a thorough vetting process, and anyone who has a flag of having tried to sponsor 43 previous kids would certainly be flagged.
I would hope so. I yield back. I'm out of time.